A few storms coming through Cheshire last night, so I thought I'd cut some dahlias before the plants were cut down by the storms, and I've used some of them in this autumn sustainable flower arrangement. So if you'd like to see exactly how I made this with some dahlias that perhaps you've got from your flower cutting garden, then watch on and I'll show you exactly the steps to create this. When you're looking to arrange flowers in a vase, the vase and the size is almost as important as the flowers. So I've selected the nearest thing I've got to a Constance Spry vase because she is my floral heroine. And although this is a replica of her window vases that she used for her extremely famous shop in London that she opened in the 50s. I never ever use floral foam. I think you can arrange in a much more natural style by just using an open vessel and a ubiquitous bit of chicken wire. So this is the gauge that I use. It's about 1 inch. It looks like a honeycomb, and you don't want the piece to be too big, neither do you want it to be too small. So if you measure it roughly to the size and down the side of the vessel, what I do is then carefully roll it up, because I haven't got a pin frog in here because I don't really like using them, to be honest. They're too rigid. The stems just kind of poke straight up, and I don't think that suits a sort of more artistic, natural aesthetic that I really like for garden flowers. So you've got your mechanics in your vase, and like I mentioned, I don't use floral foam. So a great idea is to put the water in after you've put your mechanic in, because otherwise you're fertling about in the water, which is not a great idea. So I fill it to about half full, and then I have just a rough idea of the shape that I'm going to make. And when I say rough, I'm always dictated to by my ingredients. So one of the things that I think is really helpful in terms of techniques is to raise your vessel up and have it on, I think in the US you call it a lazy Susan, I call it a turntable. And so you can easily turn it, otherwise what ends up happening is you're clumbering around with your arrangement. But I also think it's a great idea to start and arrange in layers. You still don't want, as you would make a bouquet, anything below the waterline, because what ends up happening is you can't get the ingredients in very well, and you're effectively forming a grid, and you don't want anything in the way of you forming that grid. So we've got a stem going in here, and I like to have a very open sort of base layer. And when you arrange garden flowers, it's good to have an initial base layer, because some of the garden flowers, particularly at this time of year with very heavy-headed dahlias, you end up, they need a little bit of support. So you'll see that I'm placing the stems in, and none of them have gone in entirely straight. And if I turn that round, I can then start to put in some of these lower and smaller stems, but effectively I'm arcing them and out from a central point and looking to make almost like a basket of foliage for my other stems to go in. It's quite helpful with the lazy Susan to just keep turning it round and having a look at your shape, because this is a really critical shape. You almost won't see these branches because when you've got your flowers in, they're almost hidden, but they are important because they're a very dark saturated colour, and you'll end up, you will see a sort of echo of that colour. Now this Physocarpus diablo has got really lovely seed pods on it, and if I cut another branch off, you can see that you can get more than one stem from a single branch. So I'm just going to put some in the centre here, and you can also use these stems and cut them twice. So if you cut them really close to one of the buds, then you'll get 2 stems out of your one, so you're not really wasting any material. So that one can go in there because I do want some lower stems. I don't want them all at the same height. And then I'll just use that stem to go in there. And what I've done is I've effectively balanced my stems on either side, and I'll just have a little look. You can always cut a little bit more off. You can't always add it on, so I think that one's a little bit tall. So I'll cut about 1 inch off and bring it over a little bit and have it pulled down a bit. I'm going to cut a little bit off there, and then that is my layer. I'm going to carry on with my layers, and this next layer is a super important one because it's what's really signalling seasonality. We're lucky enough to live right next to a canal, and it's surrounded by hawthorn hedges, and this is what happens in autumn. Wonderful, amazing berries that just shout autumn, I think. So anything that doesn't have kind of berries in for an autumnal arrangement, I don't really think it feels very autumnal. So I always like to make sure that I've got something that really signals that season. I will say this to you though, do be super careful, because the thorns on hawthorn, it's not called hawthorn for nothing, are extremely sharp, and if you get a stab from blackthorn, then you have to be very, very careful because it can actually give you sepsis. Whenever you're using woodies, always split the stem, because that way they still take up water, because they are notorious for drying out. So I've made that a little bit straighter, and I'm going to put him over here because I'm trying to get a sort of a balance, if you like, of berries going from one side to the other. So I turn that round and see that it goes in that direction. So I can whiz it round. The berries are such a dominant piece that I think it's important to just have a little look where you've got everything. I'm not quite happy where I've got that, so I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to put that stem up a bit more, and I'm going to place that lower down over here because it's actually going to give me a nice piece of arcing movement on that side. So the big thing is to just be happy and comfortable about changing and adding in things, and if you're not happy, changing them round. So the next big layer is the focal flower, and I've decided to use the ubiquitous focal flower for this season, which for me are dahlias. These are super well conditioned, straight into water and conditioned overnight. I always like to give them a cut, but all of this foliage now is perfect as a nestling point. I think grouping big headed dahlias together is a really good idea, and using the length of the stems is also a great idea. Now ideally use smaller headed stems on the inside, but you can always break the rules sometimes. So I like to break the rules. I think it's one of those lovely sayings of the Dalai Lama, know the rules so you can break them. And what I like to do is make sure that I'm having the dahlias at different places, different directions, and across, a line of colour across the arrangement, because I think it's really important that they don't clump. I know you can dot focal flowers, but I'm not a big fan of dotting. I think it just makes an arrangement look too formal. What I'm trying to achieve is a very sort of gardeny style look, and to dot them, I just don't think you get that. So I've got a smaller head, and I'm going to place that through my material and into my mechanic. And the advantage now of having the stems as a base and the dahlias going in is that they are supported by both the chicken wire and those stems. And if you've got a big head, it's quite helpful to just nestle it really low down and make sure that you've got them facing different directions and different heights. So I've just put a layer of dahlias in now, and now I'm going to add some lines, and I think it's always some lines of flowers though, always really good to do that. So this is Montbretia, CROCOSMIA, absolutely love it. I think it's a really one of those old-fashioned underrated flowers. I just think it's amazing. And what you can do with CROCOSMIA, she says feeling a slight bit of rain, is really extend colour and extend movement and extend shape with it. So it's like a better gladioli, if you like. So I'm going to put that round. I've only got 3 stems of this, so I'm going to put it at either end, and then I'm going to put one in the middle, and it's starting to take shape. So I'm going to add the next layer now, which is roses. And this time of the season, you get this glorious mix of a second or third flush of roses along with the dahlias. So if you're noticing the light is slightly changed, it's because we've had one of those other marvellous UK rain interruptions. So my roses, this, I think this is Lady Hamilton and Emma Hamilton. Beautiful rose, and it's a good idea to put your roses as a sort of final kind of top layer because they are absolutely exquisite. I grow very blousy open garden roses, and I've really let them blow, and I think that sort of kind of signifies autumn. I also cut my thorns off with my secateurs. I don't sort of strip them because I think it damages the stem when it's taking up water, and I don't really want to do that. So again, in terms of placing roses, I just want to have, I've only got about 4 I think, I just want to have them at, you know, sort of nice parts, and you can see they're almost just going nice parts of the arrangement, so your eye sort of rests nicely on them. And this is just such an amazing colour rose. I just love her, and she smells of musk. I really need to grow at least 10 more of her. So I'm going to make sure I get a nice clean, really good lot of cut there and slot in. And what I want it to look like is that the roses are almost tumbling out of this arrangement, because that's, you know, a really romantic and beautiful thing for roses to do, and they're kind of tonally the same way as the dahlias. Now, another really lovely ingredient, and you can see I'm starting to really layer colour and shape. These are flat-faced HELENIUMs, and they are just perfect at this time of year because they're really vivid, kind of very saturated colour, and they just do that nice little pop and that little accent. So if I turn this round, you can see that little smiling face is just coming out there. So it's nice to just pop them in the little gaps, and it's good to use smaller ingredients towards the end of your making, because you can see where you need to sort of keep the colour flowing and keep the ingredients talking to each other, because if you have them spaced too far away, they just look like they're not talking and not having a nice time. So grouping, I would always favour grouping to any other way of arranging. So this is my straw flower, HELICHRYSUM. I often dry this, to be honest, because it's a favourite dried ingredient, but I'm just going to put a few in this arrangement. I've stripped all the leaves because the leaves, frankly, are just really messy. And at this point, this is the advantage of having this Lazy Susan or sort of turning plate, because you can see around the arrangement without having to pick it up, and it's getting sort of a little bit, you know, sort of quite formed now, and you can just spin it round and start to place things quite intentionally. So I've got one more HELICHRYSUM, and I think I'm just going to do a little cluster over here. so that it's not just, you know, 2, there's 3 there. And sometimes you have to sort of have a little look down there. And I like the way that they're kind of overflowing on the arrangement. So there's a few finishing pieces, and risking life and limb here. These are TEASELS. I've kind of got a few little patches in my flower garden. It's a bit risky because they can be a bit invasive, but I actually think they are the essence of autumn, and I love to use them for Christmas, but they are really lovely just as a sort of little shape for this. They are super spiky though, so I'm just going to be really careful about putting them in. And if I just get a little piece there with a natural bend, I do like the fact that not everything is poker straight. So a good finishing thing for this piece now is to have something softer. So this is Sweet Rocket that has gone to seed, and it's brilliant because I never have to buy either a packet of Sweet Rocket seeds or in fact sow it, because it self-sows in my in my solid clay. Can you believe it? So I think it's a really lovely dancing top ingredient to just give that autumnal, where everything is turning to seed heads and it's, you know, starting to kind of cover the plants, if you like. So you don't need too much of this, just the odd little piece, because it can overpower, you know. I think there's some arrangements that, you know, grasses can dominate, and while I kind of like them, I think I want the flowers to sing. So this is my final layer, and I just think it's good to have a little look. Slot something in there. I really still have some little pieces down the bottom that I want to soften the edges with, because while you're dotting in these bits of grass, you don't want them to just look like they're, again, on their own. So the wind's getting up here a little bit, so the turntable's actually turning itself. So I think I've just got one piece that I'm going to place under there, and it's good to place it next to sort of the dark foliage, so it kind of looks, you know, you can see the individual seed heads coming along there. So I've just got a couple of pieces in the middle, and then I think we're done. So autumn is a beautiful time of year. It's the start of school almost, but the end of an abundant summer of growing. So it very much feels like, from a cutting perspective, like it's the end. But of course, for anybody who's growing flowers, September is the beginning of when you start your hardy annuals. So a bit of a mixed season, if you like. But that is my table centre for autumn in a very orange autumnal palette, using quite seasonal ingredients deliberately to make sure that this can only be placed in the month of September, because my hawthorn berries are only there then, and the seed heads are only there then, and the CROCOSMIA is only really abundant now, and my TEASELS are just signalling that it's this time of year. So layering is a great way of doing it. I hope you've enjoyed watching. See you in the next video.